All right, well, Coach, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here. I've been following your page and geeking out on your stuff and using you'll have these like things that you're using for your like. It looks like some of your athletes are really, really young, like 5 years old, all the way to like 14. Like I'm watching that, and I'm using them for all of my college athletes. And I'm a huge fan of your page. I'm excited to have this conversation and pumped to have you here.
Oh, cheers for having me on. Yeah, man, I get that quite a lot. Like a lot of parents even saying like, why isn't this part of our training? And it's not something I've even really thought about. It's just one of those things where I work with young kids, so you got to get them engaged, right? So you can't get away with just saying, we're going to run on a treadmill or we're just going to do 3 sets of 10. It's got to be inspiring. And I learned that the hard way. Like it's not like I suddenly knew how to do that. Yeah, I've had some disaster training sessions, that's for sure. But each time you do it, you just learn a little bit more. And I guess that's what sort of ended up the way I do things, I guess, and working with the young athletes I do.
Dude, what you just mentioned there was like it was out of necessity, and I see so many coaches fight themselves with this. Out of my gym, they have a bunch of so like my gym, I rent or like I rent the field. Like our field is a shared space, so we have like a bunch of people coming on the field. When we have our training sessions, it's our field and we got it perfectly. But throughout the day, if I'm lifting into my gym and doing stuff back there, shooting content back there, there'll be people on the field, and I see these youth athlete like soccer camps will come in there all the time. And dude, I'm telling you, these kids will not listen to a word that is said the entire session, and nothing gets done other than the coach yelling at the kids and the kids like still not listening because it's not fun. And then they let them play a game and they let them play a game or the gamified, they make some sort of fun thing and the kids eat it up and they get so much work done and it is so productive. And I'm like, guys, how are you not seeing? And then they always save it for like the last 5 minutes. And it's like the only 5 minutes that anything gets done during the entire session. I'm like, how do you guys not see that? Like you would save one, yourself stress as a coach. You're not yelling the whole time. But two, you're getting way more done with the athletes and the kids in front of you, development wise. Like if that's your, because I think that's especially in the American world, and I'd like to know the UK kind of thought process. But in the American world, it's like you want to be serious. You want to be a serious coach because you want results, and that's kind of like how it's like written up and wrapped up in this bow. And to me, it's like you're getting less results doing that. Like you're getting less results being in the quotation serious because the kids are doing less work. They're not listening to you. You're just yelling more.
Yeah, like it's something I've seen all over. You see it on social media, you see it in different environments, and you can't push back against kids. I think the like when I was trying to be really structured when I first started working in like school. So I started in PE lessons originally. That's where I first started doing like strength training was to kids in phys ed lessons, and like you got 30 lads to 12 years old. Like you can't push back against that. You're just not going to win. And I think instead of pushing back, like you said, why don't we like meet them in the middle? Like, can we? You've hit the nail on the head there. Like, why are we just doing 5 minutes of games at the end of the session where we get loads of engagement, we get loads of the efforts put in that drives adaptations? So I think sometimes like people just forget like you do need the effort as well. Like if a kid's playing a game and they're racing each other, they're probably gonna stimulate a central nervous system and reach max speeds much more likely than when you're shouting at them and trying to get them to do something that they're not listening to. So yeah, I see it a lot, and I don't think it's anyone's fault in terms of people. Everyone wants to try create the outcome for a child in a training session. That's what every coach is always trying to achieve. They're trying to achieve something, but I just think it's no one's fault, but there really isn't been any guidance into how to actually do it. Like PE teachers obviously do a lot of training and some coaches and stuff, but especially in like the strength training realm, there's very, very little education for coaches alike to actually like figure out what the hell they're meant to be doing. And like everyone's just trying to figure it out. And they think that they need to get the kids to listen to them in order to actually get any results. But actually, if you can just set up a session in a way that lets the kids just be kids, you're going to get much better outcomes, in my opinion, anyway.
Well, that leads into my next question I had for you. What was the light bulb moment, or was it like a mentor or another coach that you were like modeling like the first iteration of like I need to try this something like I something new and I saw
Yeah.
somebody else doing that. Like, did you have anything like that where you're like, oh, this is a light bulb or a mentor telling me to do something, or I had an example of this? Because like you said, it is not like it took me a lot of mentors to get to a point in which I was comfortable doing these things because I was taught the exact opposite for most of my like career, regardless of like I just so I was like I was at a point where I was ignoring what was happening right in front of me because I had been taught something else, you know? And like
Yeah.
I had a lot of mentors tell me like just watch what's happening in front of you. Just see everything happening in front of you. Watch what these sessions could look like and then they would show me their session like that is way more fun. They're getting way more done. But like you said there's not really a great educational platform for that. So how did you get to the point in which you're like I need to change this and this is what I'm going to do instead?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a light bulb moment. I'd say it's more of like a catastrophe moment. So, like, and I talk about this all the time. I'm always like constraints-led approach, dynamic systems theory is something like I really base my coaching around. And I think sometimes as coaches, we actually forget that actually happens to us. Like we're a product of our environment. And essentially, my environment threw me into a coaching environment where I had to like really drastically change things. So back in 2017, 2018. So after I was a strength conditioning coach in a private school for a year, I then luckily got a PhD position at university in England, in Wales, sorry. And essentially, they got the funding from Sport Wales. So Sport Wales are the national governing body in Wales, and they look at like general problems. And they just saw like, right, we've got all these talented 16-year-old athletes coming into our pathway who cannot even move well, like can't lunge, can't squat, can't, they're not ready for a gym environment. So Sport Wales came up with the idea, it's like, okay, like how can we not only just help, these athletes coming into our pathway, but generally just prepare all children, so all children get access to it. So they came up with this idea for this PhD for someone to go into schools and deliver S&C in PE lessons and look at the effects of it. So I got the position and they're like, right, cool, we'll secure you some schools. But this is one of those really weird things. But they secured funding from this thing through the EU. We're not really even part of the EU anymore. It's getting a bit political, but essentially they gave money and said, right, you can go deliver this, we'll fund the whole thing, but you have to deliver it in areas of social deprivation, like really low social economic status, some of the poorest areas in Wales and even poorest areas in Europe. So they got me in schools that were essentially, had the lowest socioeconomic status, like 60% of children lived in poverty, getting free school meals. So it's not like, a school where loads of kids play sport and it was in, I wouldn't say a rougher area, but it's just one of those areas that just doesn't have the money. So you've got 30 kids, right, and I was working with 11 to 13-year-olds. And these kids aren't like sporty and they're not thinking, oh, I want to be the next rugby player or football player or, I want to go off to university. These kids are just going to this school because they have to. When you step into that PE lesson, so I've come from an environment where I've done my undergrad, been taught S&C, been, coaching in a private school with some like higher level athletes. And then I go into this environment with these kids who just basically just didn't give a shit. That's the only way I can put it. And like I just got eaten alive. Like I was like, right, cool, we'll do a warm up. And within the warm up, like they're all like, what? The other kids over there playing football. Like, why are we doing this rubbish like strength stuff? Half of them like run off, grab football, start booting the footballs around. And I'm just like, my world just imploded because this is just nothing anyone had ever prepared me for. Like, no coach could ever say, right, this is going to happen. And so like it was diabolical. Trying to get them to do anything for that whole like 40-minute slot that I had was just awful. And it wasn't their fault, it's my fault because I was completely underprepared. So it's not a reflection of them, it's a reflection of me. And then I just got home and literally like hands in my head, sat at my desk, just like, wow, I can't have another session like that. That's so bad.
How
Uh,
long did that last? How long like how long were you beating your head against the wall where you're like, I gotta
oh man.
change?
Yeah. So that first intervention I had to deliver PE to, I think it was three different classes twice a week. So I was doing 6 sessions a week. And like after the first one, I was like, oh my God, like I've got to go back tomorrow and deliver it to another class. And it was literally like I just had to think then I was forced because I didn't just have kids turning up who were like, yeah, we'll do our warm-up, we'll do our plyometrics, cool Ben, we'll do our squats. Because I had this like insane work environment that I was underprepared for, I just had to drastically change what I did. So then it wasn't like it suddenly became this thing that was really good. It was just like, okay, I came up with one idea. I can remember coming up with one idea, which was like, we did a relay. I got the boys into like two teams and literally heavy med ball, like 3-4 kilo med ball for them. It's relatively heavy. I was like, right, we're gonna have a relay. You just got to lob this ball. Next kid picks it up, lobs it, and you're gonna race to the end of the football pitch and back. And I got loads of engagement, and they loved it. And I was like, right, okay, we're getting med ball throws. We're getting some, exposure to stimulus. And then the rest of the session was still diabolical. But I had one week where so then, the next week I had that idea and then I came up with another idea. And then, so over a few weeks, I started to get a few ideas. But then what actually then happened, like the med ball relay idea, get to week 4 or 5, I was still trying to bank on that. And they're like, no, this is boring. Like, why are we doing this again? And I was like, so another realization was like, yeah, you can come up with ideas, but you can't just use the same ones over and over again. So that like period of 10 weeks of like really trying and difficult environment, I got to the end of it and I just started to really change my way of thinking. And then the year after, I then had to really roll it out on a large scale. So I then delivered to like even more PE classes, more kids, more schools. Did it for like a whole school term, which is like 12 weeks. And got a chance to then just refine all these ideas then. And so yeah, it wasn't a light bulb moment. It was just an absolute catastrophe. And that's kind of what just changed my thinking. And then after that's when I opened my own training facility. And what was really cool, I had all these ideas and I built up, took them into my own facility and just had the freedom of coaching 5 different classes a day to really just go run with all these ideas and then had all the equipment as well. Like it went from sports hall to then like having a climbing wall to having the monkey bars to having balance beams, air tracks to just really explode with all the ideas that we could come up with.
Dude, that was one of the things you just said there too, was how we talk about constraints with athletes and constraints there, but it's like the biggest question I get is like, how do you come up with these exercises? How do you come up, like, how are you creative? It's like, motherfucker, for a while I didn't have a choice. Like there was two big things. I had a 400 square foot gym, was my very first gym. It was I mean, dude, it was so small. It was dangerously small. Like I'm like, it is tiny. And we would have 10 to 15 athletes in this 400 square foot gym. It's like I had to be creative, dude, especially in the Minnesota winters. In the summer, it wasn't as bad because we could go outside and do stuff. But even then, you're constrained to the park, which was amazing. Like I had to, like you said, okay, I need to come up with a relay. I need to come up with something that's fun. But then even with the strength stuff, it's like I didn't have enough equipment to like do the traditional stuff. I had to be creative.
Yeah.
And the amount of like I just feel like that's such a tool you or like a muscle you can build too, is like, oh, now I'm seeing it through these lens. But then COVID was another really, really important light bulb moment for me. I mean, catastrophe moment's another good word for it too. It's like I didn't have a choice. Like that was a point where I had a bunch of coaches like yourself on at this point, constraint-led coaches, ecological approach, differential learning. Like they were telling me all of this stuff, and I valued it. I really thought it was important. But when I was at my college, I had a 20,000 square foot college with my racks and everything was beautiful. And I was like, so like I heard all this knowledge, but when I got my stuff, I was back in my comfort zone. I would just go back to my traditional program we just run through, and I was in a culture where they would listen to me no matter what. Like that group of kids, they didn't really. I mean, it was college football, so like they're motivated already. They would kind of just do it. But then COVID hit, and I had to come up with a way to like, okay, how do I train 150 athletes with no weight room, nothing? And it was such an amazing like tool to work on these skill sets. How can you solve the problem? Okay, you want this stimulus, you want this input, you want this motivational factor here. How can you come up with that with like two pieces of equipment? And that's something like when I do like consults with coaches who want to get more creative, it's something that I tell them all the time. It's like, you want to come up with a cool warm up, like constrain yourself as a coach to like two pieces of equipment and force yourself to come up with a warm up like with those two pieces of equipment and see what you can come up with. And I just think it's like, it sounds like you and I were forced into those constraints, but I also feel like it's something like as a practice you can do as a coach, like where you still actively like force yourself into the constraints, whether it's forced or not.
Yeah, for sure. Like I remember in the facility where I did my main 3 years of coaching my own facility, sort of at least once a month I would go down, or maybe every other week really, and I'd plan a session for some kids and be like, right, I can't use any of my ideas that I've used before, and I'd go down like an hour early and be like, right, I need some new stuff because, like I said before, kids get quite familiar and they like novel experience. And if you don't give them that novel experience, you lose the engagement. So I put that constraint on myself, like, right, I've got to come up with new stuff and just like keep offering new stuff. It could, because once you've got a bank of it, it can be easy to kind of just sit back and,
Rely
you
on
know,
it. Yep.
rely on it, but you know, it'll catch you up eventually. And like you hit the nail on the head with the COVID stuff. So like where I've just released online training programs for, you know, for kids and parents, you know, who are 7 to 11 years old, they want to go online, follow along to training video. The assumption is that they don't have any equipment. So I'm having to do a whole engaging session for them that has no equipment. And now I've gone through another learning process now because I'm just coming up with loads of different ways to constrain how to learn squats or lunges or all these different things. And I've come up with new stuff recently that I didn't even think I would ever come up with because it gets to when I film some new sessions, I'm like, I've used like all my ideas. I'm gonna have to think of something new, and I can think of new stuff. And I think for a lot of coaches looking in on this, they find it really like, where's the creativity come from? And I think it's yeah, like you need some understanding of like how children work and their psychology and stuff, but like a lot of it is like you just if you're forced to do it, you'll come up with something and it'll work most likely.
And that I do the same thing every Wednesday. And then because I ran into the same trap where I was like, I was really creative during the COVID period. Then I came back and like I kind of ran out of the drills and we are kind of running over the same games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was like some of them that used to be amazing. I just started to realize I'm like, oh, the energy isn't there. Like, what's going on? I'm like, oh, it's because we've played this game so many times. It's not a new novel experience for them. And so now, even now, so my Wednesday game we play, it's a new game that I have to come up with every Wednesday. Whether it's like one silly rule, like and but the amount of cool games you come up with and like the athlete's favorite games you come up with because you're forced to. And there's a lot of games and there's a lot of things that we try that are just like they're not it. And like the athletes love Wednesdays for that because then they can just call me a dumbass like, dude, this game isn't working. I'm like, yeah, it's not. We can go back to handball. Like we'll figure it out. But like one of the ones we played is like opposite-handed football, like bounce football, like silly things where it's just like one small constraint because you haven't played it that way before totally changes the game. And now the athletes are like absolutely in love with that. And you wouldn't have done that if you had just stuck with your handball game or whatever the game is. Well, like volleyball, like we play this meathead volleyball at our gym. That's a ton of fun. But even those, it's like if I know the game is good and I like just over rely upon it, I never find that new meathead volleyball. I never find that like next step. And so that's been something that I really enjoy. And again, this is something I talk to coaches about too. It's like it's okay for the session to be fun for you as a coach too. Like I think
Yeah.
that's a big piece of a lot of it too. It's like I think a lot of coaches you see it, they dread their own sessions. And if you dread your own session, imagine the energy that is not being spent on your athletes or with your athletes because you're dreading it. You're like, this is the same thing over and over again. And I just watch so many coaches go into like automated mode and they almost start to resent. I don't know if it's resent their athletes or resent their sessions, but it ends up being taken out on their athletes. I'm like, dude, if you just enjoy your own sessions, I promise you, your athletes are going to enjoy not only you more, but your sessions more and get a lot out of them.
Yeah, I think people feel this pressure to get as much out of a session and they naturally think that can only come from structure. But I completely agree with you. I mean, my last session of the day, which was like 8 till 9 p.m. Monday to Friday, was always like typically be the oldest group's latest. So I used to have like academy footballers that come in at like, and there'd be 14, 15, 16 year olds. And those sessions were class because we play like headers and volleys and like one bounce and all these different games we'd come up with. And I'd play them with them. So like for the first like 15 minutes of the session, we're like getting super competitive. And then we used to come up with like all these random games like one football, cricket, and all these different mad games that had mad rules. Like you get 4 runs if you hit this wall, you're out if you hit any of my like computer stuff on the side, and like like all those things. And that was just generally so. We used to play like yoga. We used to get these big yoga balls and play football with them and stuff like that. And just like you said, that those were fully involved. Like I actually enjoyed that part of the session fully. Like I'd be involved in. I'm like, right, probably should move on to the weights now. But like, yeah, it needs to be if it makes you want to play it, you're probably ticking the boxes in terms of like your athletes want to as well.
100%, dude. And when you're involved in the games and you're coming up with the rules actively and like and changing the things, like it's like a running joke I say or at my gym where it's like the encyclopedia of rules that we have now, and it's like the guys that have been with me and like because we have some college athletes that are with us like 3 months at a time, then have to go back to their colleges. We have summer athletes, and we have athletes that just come in and out. But then we also have our lifers that have been there for some of them have been there for 4 years now, and they know every rule. And it's
Yeah.
so funny, like the a newcomer coming in. So this morning we had four new rugby guys, and we were playing this handball game, and they're like, "What is happening?" There's so many like niche rules that we try and we play with just to make the game more interesting. And they're like, dude, I gotta like get a rule book for this new random game that we're playing. But it's so much fun like watching them figure it out and like on the fly be a part of the training session. When you are creating these, how much like when in your training sessions, how much is structured, like you have a game, or how much of it is like structured kind of, but you're coming up with new rules or new variations of the game on the spot? Or like what's kind of your approach when you're going into a session working with an athlete? How much is alive, how much is structured, and how do you balance that to where you're not going full like I talk about like going full movement yogi versus going full meathead and like trying to find that like sweet balance, because I definitely like I go too far in one direction than the other
Yeah.
direction, but I try for the most part to like stay in that balanced area
Yeah.
if I go one way or the other.
So I used to use different structures for different age groups. And the reason I did that was like, if we look at some of the psych research in kids, there's this thing called like the ego depletion theory. Yeah, I always think theories aren't concrete because there's no real way of actually proving a theory. Like they're not like scientific things like you can measure how fast someone jumps, but when it's a theory, it's much harder to actually understand. It's just like something that's like a sweeping statement to cover like a phenomenon in that sense. Whereas a theory, and it kind of says that like if something, the younger we are, the less self-control reserves we have. So if something isn't inherently enjoyable, it uses up our self-control reserves and we only have a limited amount. So a child might have 5 minutes of self-control. Me and you might have 3 hours. We might be able to sit and listen to something really boring on health and safety that we don't want to be there, but we know we have to, otherwise our gym will get shut down. But a kid, like they're not going to sit in 3 hours of health and safety. Like, and there's this theory that just says it's called ego depletion, and essentially the younger the kids are, the less self-control they have, that they can exhibit, they can sit still, like, or do something that's not inherently enjoyable. So I try to tie into that and go, right, so the younger kids are going to do stuff that's more open, less structured, less contextual information from myself. And then as they get older, we'll start to like see more structure in the session.
Mm,
So with I used to coach like 6 to 8 year olds. 6 to 8 year olds, it would be no what I'd call like out and out sets and reps. Then that, like sets and reps, just doing. I always use this example, but like 3 sets of 10. That's as structured as it gets. Right, setting up. This is your exercise. Do 3 sets of 10. There was none of that for 6 to 8 year olds. Then 7 to 11 year olds would have like 25% of the session can be delegated to that. So we'll do warm-up games, we'd then go into movement challenges at what might be working on upper body strength. So we might be on climb wall, monkey bars, we might be looking at some lower body stability work. So we have like cone fishing, all these different balance beams out. So like there's a theme to that, but it's still not the 3 sets of 10. And then for the last 10 minutes of the session, we might go, right, okay, we've been working on squats. We might even be doing a 6 week block of it. And we'd have their weights on the board, even for like the 8 year olds. But okay, this is where you were last week. Obviously, it's like little training bars and stuff. But they'd then, dedicate some time to that actual structure. Then 11 to 14, I'd split it 50-50. Okay, so like 50% is going to be warm up, movement challenges. And then we'd go into like what would look like an actual, what you might say, a typical traditional S&C session, but just like for 20 minutes then. So it might be 2 lower body exercises, like lower body, and then 2 upper body, like a push and pull. Real simple. After all the movement stuff we've done, go into that. And then 14 plus, I'd do it like 25%, 75%. So we might do a warm-up game. I might have a couple of mobility challenges for them, especially like around the growth spurt mobility challenge is going to be quite prominent for those lot. And then go into like their traditional S&C, like a structured session, still really basics. Obviously, kids are young training age, the basics just work, and that's what we want to do. And then finish the session with a bit of a game as well, like just to keep moving quickly. Like, all right, we're going to have 5 minutes at the end. We're going to play football, cricket. We know who's the leader on this one. Like everyone knew who had the high score within the gym. And it was like a cultured thing. Like each group had their own rules, had the top scorer, and each week we're trying to beat it and stuff. And so that was kind of like the structure that I used. But there's always exceptions. Like I remember coaching a 12, 13-year-old lad who went up into the older groups because mentally I felt he was there, ready to push on. He was actually going to the Worlds for BMX. So that's an example of like kind of coaching what's in front of you. You can always have these rough guides, but you also need to be reflexive. And sometimes I also had a group of like 14 to 15-year-olds who actually stayed on the 50-50 structure that I'd used for 11 to 14-year-olds because they just loved it and there was no need to change it. If it's not broke, I'm not going to try fix it. Like they just love training, they love the session. There was no need to change anything. So those are like my rough structures. But again, you've always got to be flexible to what's in front of you for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing with the different ages because you can look at an athlete like I have, like you said, I have 14-year-old athletes that are more focused than my 24-year-old athletes. And it's like I play around with the structure. It's like whatever gets the work done with those athletes, like I'm gonna go do it. If the 14-year-old really likes the way, and again, that's the same thing like I think about too. It's like when I was 14, 15, 16, I was already addicted to the weight room. Like I just loved it. There was something in me that inherently was just like, this is what I love doing. And there's no coach that I mean, there was probably a coach that could have ruined it for me, but it was just like I was gonna listen to whoever told me whatever they told me at that moment, and I was just obsessed with it. But then again, and a lot of time, but this is what I also found. It's like a lot of times the better athletes are not on that spectrum. They are like and I think a lot of it's like their brain works in this creative, like they solve these movement solutions so creatively, and then you give them a non-creative movement problem and they're just like, well, this is kind of dumb, like I already know how to solve this, it's not worth grinding my head into to be able to do this. And I've noticed that with a lot of good athletes. So it's like I don't know if there's one, like I don't know. I kind of avoid saying the more focused athlete is better and we want to get our athletes more focused because of what I've found is honestly like the more focused athletes are more like me. It's like we're the workhorses and it's like all the coaches love us, but it's like we're never going to be the NFL superstars. And then you see the really special athletes where if you can just give them some structure, like something to keep them showing up because that's all they got to do. Like if you just keep them showing up and you make it fun for them to keep showing up, man, the things those athletes do are unbelievably special.
Yeah, I think I was very similar. And I think as well, that's actually something that ties in a little bit to this like bias of coaches expecting teenagers just to enjoy strength training because most of the time people like you and I end up doing this because we were obsessed with it when we were teenagers, right? We lifted weights. I'd ended up going to university and doing the only course that in my eyes was lifting weights. Like I thought saw strength and conditioning as an 18-year-old. I was like, yeah, man, that's a bit of me. Like and there's that bias that kind of we don't see how other kids see it sometimes. And that was kind of that's why I had these catastrophe moments as well, like previously, because I hadn't really resonated that like actually there's only a handful of kids who like really love strength training inherently, but there's loads of people who can be introduced to it and find their way to it and then start to love it, right? But I think yeah, I was the same, but it's just sometimes I think that actually like ties into the bias of like why we don't realize that actually we have to find a pathway for all these kids to find strength training essentially.
Yeah, the ego death as a strength coach is one that I feel like not very many have, but once you have, it's so it makes your job so much easier because then you can just actually just meet the athlete where they're at rather than where you're at. But I mean, it took me a long time. Like
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Like it was not something I was born with. It was something that I fought for a long, probably 3 or 4 years of being a like legitimate strength coach, and then all of my high school, college, like all of my high school, college years, I would like shame my better athletes that were teammates of me for not working out hard or not doing all these things. And it's like they were just so much better at the sport than me, but I was like, no, I have the answers. And it's so funny, like looking back on it, it's like, dude, like where did you have the confidence to think you had the answers when they were a better athlete than you? And it's like, and of course, and then you think about it, it's like, of course they're not listening to you because what you say is the answer isn't work. I mean, it's working in a sense you're bigger, faster, stronger, but it's like you get and you play on Saturday, you play college football on Saturday, and they're still making unbelievable plays, and you're sitting there grinding in the holes. I was like, it was kind of like a weird. I really could not see what was right in front of my face because I had been taught it, but once I did have that light bulb moment of like, oh, that's why they're not like they're just not addicted to it like you are, and they're better. Like it was very, very freeing. One of the things that you mentioned was the football cricket. You've brought that up 2 or 3 times now. How do you play football cricket? What is that game?
I don't know, like obviously I know cricket's not as big in the States as it is over here, but essentially we just get like two yoga blocks, stand them on top of each other as a wicket, and then a player has to stand in front of those two yoga blocks, and someone bowls an enlarged. We usually use big tennis balls like this big, and someone throws it, and you're trying to knock over those yoga blocks, but the person who's in front of the yoga blocks is trying to defend it by kicking the ball. And if they kick the ball and it hits like a side wall, they get 4 runs. If it hits the back wall, they get 6 points. And then they've got to stay in as long as possible. And you just keep throwing the ball at the wicket until you knock it over, or someone catches the ball on the volley, sort of thing. Um, so that was football cricket. It was I actually grew up like when I went to college and it was a rugby college. We used to play corridor cricket for like hours on end because we had like a load of 16-year-old lads didn't have much to do. So we'd actually have like games where like because you had lots of different buildings where like lots of different lads lived, and we'd have like away games against the other building next door, play corridor cricket. So it kind of just evolved from that from my youth. But yeah, football cricket was the version. It was mainly because I was working with academy footballers, so they all just wanted to boot the ball. So
Yeah.
that's where I made that change.
That's all. That's awesome. I love the my favorite games we've ever played are like combinations of two sports into one, and then like a sport they're slightly more used to or more interested in with a combination of a sport that they don't. Like handball is not a big American sport, but
Yeah,
playing handball with the like American football guys and like twisting rules and adding things in that they enjoy and they like doing have been it's been one of the most rewarding games to play and watch. And the watching these athletes move in these situations too, it's just so much fun to watch. And it's so much fun to watch them like discover new abilities that they have or they had previously. Now they're more confident because I think that's one of the biggest things that I talk about and I enjoy with the game-based model, especially for our agility sessions or speed sessions, is watching an athlete gain confidence and like teach themselves that they are a scorer or teach themselves that they are a defender of the ball. And I think a lot of times, especially in the American football world, it's kind of like if you scored in like eighth grade, you told yourself you're a scorer, right? Like whether it was recess or like little kid football, and you kind of just run that story. And so you have these athletes that have told like I'm an offensive weapon, and they just started that story when they were young, and maybe they were a little bit more physically advanced at that age, and then they have that confidence when they step on the pitch. And then you have a kid that maybe was a little behind, was a little bit smaller as a kid, or literally just didn't get past the ball, like friend group, whatever it is, like recess, it's like you're throwing to your
yeah,
buddy. So like some kid didn't touch the ball. You get those kids that are physically developed enough now, and you get them scoring in a game. And it's so cool to watch that like light bulb moment of, oh, I can do this. I can score the ball. I am an athlete. I am able to defend that guy. And for me, it's literally just a rep game. In the same way that meatheads prove themselves that they're strong, I really believe you can prove to an athlete that they are a scorer, that they are capable on the field with reps and just giving them experience.
yeah.
And we do a lot of things where it's like implementing something like if you are like sometimes I'll make the guys that just ball hog, I'll make them unable to score and they can only pass. Sometimes I'll do it a little less discreetly and make that like if you score once, you can't score again. So then it's like the guy that always scores, he'll score the first one and then he's like the rest of the game he has to pass. But I really value that aspect for games is that like psychological component of giving them that light bulb moment of kind of changing their story of who they are as an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well with like teenagers, especially, there's that natural want for coaches to kind of pigeonhole people. They're like,
Mm.
right, okay, yeah, you're
Yeah.
fast, we're gonna put you on the wing, or you know, you're really strong, we're gonna put you in the center or something, and depending what sport it is. And I think that bias really limits people's development and opportunity. And if anything, like you've hit the nail on the head, sometimes in coaching, you get someone who always scores, so we take away that opportunity for them to score. And I think like that actually needs to be done positionally in like lots of different sports. So instead of, someone who's really fast and we play them out on the wing in rugby, or, a striker in football or something, is actually take that completely away from them and like not let them have that like bias that just allows them to rely on their natural giftedness. And I think that way, ultimately they're going to be a winger, right? If they're really quick, that's where they're going to end up. But we need to give them a really diverse skill set. And I think it's really bad in youth sports, and it's going off on a tangent, but in youth sports, we see it like coaches will pick the best kids for a team, and I'm this is where like I think people get it a bit messed up. It's like competition is great. Competition is one of the most biggest drivers for kids, right? They love competition. They love competing with their peers. They love because it gives them a sense of competence. It gives them a dopamine release when they score. It gives them a dopamine release when they win. But we need to allow that to happen and allow like competition, but also like at the same time limit people and not always just pick the best kid and put them in a position that means that best kid can always score a lot, because you're doing them a disservice and you're doing the rest of the team a disservice. And kids don't develop linearly as well. Like, you know, there's so much talent out there that's just gone completely by the wayside because it wasn't nurtured. I always say you're only as good as talent that's in your pathway. And I think like one, you lose talent through people just leaving because they didn't enjoy it. And two, you lose talent because some kids naturally develop a lot slower. So if they develop slower and then they're not getting the opportunity to play because they don't get picked because they're not as good, that then forms that bias because they're getting less game time because they develop slower. Where actually they might just be 2 years behind everyone, but if they still got the amount of game time, they could have like out of nowhere just become this absolute talent. And you see that all the time. It's not alien for these success stories of athletes to who no one thought they were going to be an elite athlete. Like that isn't alien at all. We see it in loads of different sports where people come through, they're like 21 years old, get picked up, get signed, and then before you know it, they're playing like internationally and stuff like that. And I think where we go wrong with like working with youth, especially, is like with coaches, especially, is just like picking the best. Okay, that's the fastest player. We're going to put them in the position that we need fast, or and I think that's where we're going wrong massively. And I think again, like you said, with your athletes, you're actually trying to break that down completely. Like everyone's coming in on a blank slate, playing these games where no one knows what they are. No one knows if I'm a striker or knows if I'm defense, offense, and they actually get that opportunity to try it again. And that should be just happening everywhere. That should be happening, as soon as kids start sport, all the way through to when they finish when they're older.
Well, the one of the things that I really like that you mentioned there is like it's not because I think people get the aspect of you're doing the rest of the team disservice. I think kind of people get that and they feel for that, but they also are like, well, yeah, but I want to work with the highest level athletes. But it's like you're also doing the highest level athlete disservice, like you mentioned. It's like it doesn't do you any good to just keep doing the thing. We already know you can do that. We already know you have that ability, right? And continually doing that. And as you raise in competition, everybody's now going to be fast. You already have that skill set, like what are the other things? I always talk about like trying to go from shit to suck rather than just like banging your head going from like good to great. Like you already have these things over here. I'm not, and again, I'm not trying to get rid of those things. It's just that
Yeah.
they're not going to go away. And we're still going to have them. And you're natural, like when the game comes down to the line and you get to use that ability, we're going to use that ability. I just really feel like in settings like yours and I's and like in a sport practice setting, it's why are we not spending the time actually developing those athletes to unlock the next thing that they could use and the counter attack? And I talk about this in the American football world when I was playing defensive line. Like our practices were so pressure based that it was literally if you had a tool, you had to use that tool because otherwise you were going to get benched almost instantly. And so I used the same two tools over and over. I just bull rush and push pull these same two moves and I was good at them and it was successful and it worked to a level, but my development stalled so fast because it literally was the only two things I worked on. And all I needed was a environment in which I could fail trying something new or working on something. And that's the thing, like when that's these high level athletes sometimes get frustrated when they can't score because like, well, I could, it's like, I know you could have, I understand that. I know that caused a failure that you otherwise wouldn't have had. But that failure, again, we're playing the 10-year game. We're playing the 3-year game in the college football world, especially like playing the 4-year game with these athletes even. And I feel like most coaches and practices, it's so pressure based that they play the one play game. It's like all that matters is this very singular play. And I think the more we do that, the more we strap not only our bad athletes into being who they already are, because the bad athletes can't afford to do those things, but I also think we strap the good athletes that have particular skill sets into those models. And this is the thing, when an athlete reaches escape velocity to where they are just so much better than their competition, then they just naturally play and they naturally mess around with these things. You watch like guys like Steph Curry or Patrick Mahomes shoot and like throw the ball. It's like they are just so much better that they can play within the one play. Like they don't have that pressure. But I'm trying to allow for that environment with all of our athletes, even our good athletes. But the one percenters of the one percenters do it naturally, and you look at their progression and they don't stall. And so it's like the rich get richer in athletics because they're allowed to. And I think we can create an environment where everybody gets richer, including the good, like going from good to great with an athlete by unlocking a different skill set, seeing the field in a different way.
Yeah, I think as well, like what's really interesting for me, and I find it quite interesting, like speaking to guys like yourself, is I don't know how it looks in terms of what we do in the UK and what we do in America, but just like as an outsider looking in to the USA, few things I look at are like, man, university sport just looks insane, like just looks incredible. But at the same time, it creates such a high pressure system where like the concept that you guys have university stadiums and fill out games like D1 games are getting thousands and thousands of people to go watch it. That is just absolutely insane. Like that just doesn't happen here in the UK. We just don't even have the infrastructure. A university game might get a couple of hundred people watch if you're lucky. And I think like whilst that's really cool, and I always look at it and just think, oh man, imagine being an athlete who went through that process and got to play D1 or something like that. It'd be really what a cool experience. But at the same time, it creates such a high pressure, even not making it to professional sport, that people are so scared of deviating from the plan. And it just trickles down further and further and further to 7-year-olds who can't miss practice, who can't miss their strength training, who can't miss their session with their PT, and it's like I can see why it's like that. I'm not blaming anyone because when it just trickles down, that's going to happen. It's just a cascade effect. But at the same time, it's like, if we just look at the research, early specialization doesn't result in professionalization. There's not much of correlation at all, but behind kids who specialize early and whether they make it to the top level. So it's like, if we're research based, let's just deviate from the plan and make an enjoyable experience. And if it's super fun and we give them all the ingredients they need to develop and they become a professional athlete as a byproduct, great. But if they don't, they had a great time because the big issue for me is we're so focused on creating these professional athletes that we forget about the process. And the process then just kind of is a sucky experience for everyone. And then it only works for that one who did become professional. All right, yeah, we made a professional. But what about the thousands of kids who just like don't really think much of you as a coach or like don't really like what their experience was with sport, who dropped out and stuff? And I think we're getting it a little bit. There's a few sports over here, like I say football, but soccer, we see that a lot over here. Like kids getting picked up by academies at 7 years old, getting dumped by the academy at 11. They were never a prospect. And they wanted parents and kids to go to training every day after school, traveling 2 hours, doing all these different things, giving up their weekend times because the parents have sold the dream that their kid's going to be a professional footballer when these academies are just playing a numbers game. And it's we sit here in some sports, but I don't know, I could be wrong, but I see it more in the States as well because you've just got such a big infrastructure at the university level as well.
And that's the thing that I think about, and maybe this is a wrong belief, but I really believe those professional athletes are going to be professional athletes regardless. Like what I value is can you get somebody to that level that maybe wouldn't have before, and while making it a good experience. So like what you're saying, it's like we have the 1,000 athletes where it's a bad experience, but one made it, and then the coach would be like, it's because like it takes the broken eggs to make the omelet, like that type of thought process. It's rampant in American football, and a lot. I mean, baseball's really bad with it too here. But it's like
Okay.
that dude was probably going to make it regardless of you or not. You just made it worse. You probably slowed down his development, and he probably figured it out despite of you, not because of. And again, this is coming from somebody that really believed in that. It's gotta suck for you to rise, and there's going to be people that it just doesn't work for. And I was just like, that is just so wrong. That athlete is just unbelievably naturally gifted already, and I'm making it a shitty experience for them. And I'm not developing people that could actually, like you said, the slower learners, the people that are still waiting for that. Like you said, it's not linear. And I see it so many times where it's just like, it's this exponential growth. It's the linear process of showing up and getting the reps in. But then there's days where you see it and that athlete just did something. And it's like, I am that athlete now. And it's like, that would have never happened in the other experience. and that same athlete that succeeded with me, or they would have succeeded without, like, that pro athlete is just good, man. They're just making it. I'm not saying you can be lazy, but it's like if they're doing any training, they're going to make it. So now why not make that in training enjoyable for them? Hopefully develop things for them. They're still going to make it, but then hopefully you got this other hodgepodge. And at the bare minimum, you made it enjoyable for everybody. But I really do believe, like you said, the science shows it. You can look at it. If you just look at it in front of your eyes, you're also going to get better results, because I think that's one of the things that is lost in when you talk about long-term athletic development and play. It's these competitive people. It's like they think it's like we're talking about a participation trophy, like you and I are just like trying to just hug
Right.
everybody and do it. And again, I am on the sense of like it should just be fun for kids, but it's also better for them. It's also better for their development, and we're still getting more out of training, so you do have that win-win kind of environment.
Yeah, I think, and that's where it's like people think it's either one or the other. It's either participation trophies or it's pick your best team every
Yes.
time, turn up. It's like, man, let's meet in the middle. Like, you don't need to. Yeah, it blows my mind really, and I think you can actually create opportunities for success for many athletes in a really easy way. Like, you know, and this is where like constraints come in, but like say for example you've got a couple of athletes in your training this as a sports coach or whatever who aren't doing as well, and but they deserve an opportunity for success. You can, as a coach, be an architect for that. You can set up your training session where there's going to be competition in the training session, in the training game that you're playing, and you know who's the talented kids or the less talented, or who has the skills or doesn't have the skills for certain things, and you can quite easily set up a session to navigate who's going to succeed. And it was something I actually did in, and this wasn't like this was, it took me a while to figure this out, but like going back to the catastrophe PE lessons where um I found like when we split the teams up, when we're doing like the relays and stuff, I talked about where they were throwing the medals and stuff. Quite often, like after a few sessions, like the kids would line up and they'd look at each other, like the two teams would look at each other, and one team were like, "Nah, we don't have a chance."
Yeah.
They knew they look over, and I can remember the 3 4 sporty kids have ended up in that team, and the other team are like, nah, we ain't got a chance, we're not doing this, and they would be completely despondent, I wouldn't even bother. And and that was where the light bulb moment was like, oh, okay, right, they know this, they know what's happening. So I need to set up the session in a way that they don't realize that I've picked it in a certain way, that the really sporty kids aren't all on the same team, and that everyone has an opportunity for success. So, like, I used to then start doing games where the outcome wasn't who finished first. The outcome would be like, all right, I'm going to give 10 bonus points for the team that moved the best in like a relay, in a movement challenge. And then I'll give 10 points for the team that had the best teamwork. And then I'll give a bonus point for the best leader. And instantly, like the the way they're approaching things completely shifted. And I was obviously going to give points to people who worked hard, but actually more towards the people who needed it. Like someone who hadn't had success for a couple of weeks, looked like they were a bit down in the session, like hadn't had much success. And then I was turning around like, right, yeah, this group, you really stood out. You're the winners of this round. Let's go into the next round. And the kids don't realize that you're kind of not picking and choosing, but just giving everyone an equal opportunity to be successful. Instead of it just being right, two teams, and the kid, you've got the sporty kids who are just like, yeah, this is ours in the bag, and the other team's just like, we don't have a chance. If you change what the actual reference point for success is, then you can make it engaging continually for everyone. Like the success doesn't be right who scores the most goals or throws it the furthest. Let's shift the narrative of what success is, and then that's when we can still have really healthy competition. And that's where it's not like participation trophies or most goals, it's healthy competition, but with everyone having an opportunity to succeed. And don't get me wrong, that you need more of that for younger kids. Like that's where it's really central. And then as we get a bit older, obviously we can't give away that as much, because typically, like the older kids, we need a bit more structure because we need to help reduce risk of injury and all these different things that become more and more important as they get older. So like, there's always a fine balance, but yeah, it's like it's not just participation trophies. There's definitely everything in between. There's a full spectrum of it, and we need to really explore that more as coaches, I think.
Dude, finding the other ways for an athlete to win, absolute game changer in our gym. One of the things that we did I think this is like 3 or 4 years ago we implemented this, but we call them alpha points, and it was just a daily challenge, and the challenge rotated over and over again to be able to win the alpha point for the day. And then we'd have a leaderboard where you, if you got an alpha point, you'd write your name and you'd write how many alpha points you have for the week. Winner with the most alpha points at the end of the week would be like captain for our game days at the end. And the thing that I found that was super rewarding is we do jump challenges, and the guys that are like very bouncy, they would go win those, and the big guys wouldn't win those. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But then the next day, I would do a strength challenge. The person that does like this would go get that point. And the next day we would do like an isometric challenge. The person that holds this the longest. So then your grinders that aren't very great athletes, they can't jump the highest, they can't lift the most, they got a shot in that one, you know? And then like a mobility challenge. And this is one of the things that I love about our gym is we'll have like gymnastic girls in there with like NFL offensive linemen. So you have the girl watching the NFL offensive lineman going like, "Oh my God, I could never move that much weight, but it's so inspiring. Like, I want to go move that weight." And you have the lineman looking at the gymnastic girl like doing the splits in like one of our mobility challenges, and you're like, "Oh my God, a human's capable of moving that way. Like, I need to go push myself." But that was like one of the most rewarding things I've seen in our gym is giving everybody, again, it's still competition. It's like these are all challenges. It's just we're not testing the same thing over and over again, because when you do, like I know exactly who's going to win all of my races. I know exactly who's going to win my jumps. I know exactly who's going to live my lifts. How can you reward the skill set that athlete has and value it? And I think so many times in strength conditioning, and I talk about this all the time, it's like the kids value what you value. And if all you're cheering on in this in the American strength world, it's literally like the strength coach will just go and hang out with the dudes lifting the most amount of weight and like
Yeah.
cheer them on the whole time. It's like, of course, they don't have interest in like they know they're not the number one in what you value. But if you just open up your categories, like you said, whether it's the creative movement solution, that's another thing we do. Like, how many one of the, I didn't give alpha points for this, but I would just reward like when somebody did a cool, like if we had I'd program goblet squats and every rep has to be different. And I would literally just verbally reward, that's a really cool variation you came up with. Watching the culture of the gym shift from just doing as much weight as possible to they want to get that reward. They want to get that dopamine hit of a job well done. I need to be creative today. It was so cool watching the athletes like change what they put their effort and work and creative energy into. And it's been so much fun just watching the culture of the gym change to where everybody is competing for something again. And these competitions, people get after it. Like they're screaming at each other in these isometrics, in these, even the mobility challenge that we do. Like I'm telling, there is some of the most aggressive competition. So it's not like participation trophy, because I mean, again, some of these competitions get wild. I'm like, dude, you guys got to chill out. But everybody has a chance to win in their own specific skill set at least once a week, to where we're not just rewarding the same guys that have won since they've been 5 years old.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said there is a perfect example of it. It's not just who's got the biggest squat, who's the fastest over 40 meters. It's like everyone turning up to that environment at your gym each week has an opportunity to be successful. And it's quite cool how, we've never really spoken in person, and like we've never seen each other's socials before this year, but like our environment's actually driven us to the same outcome. Whereas we've seen where we need to create these opportunities. And again, I think that's circling back to like coaches and stuff. It's like actually the environment drives us to these solutions. It's not always just like we sat there, suddenly came up with this idea of this is how I'm going to structure my gym. It was like bit by bit, piece by piece. Each week we refine something, and it, it seems like our sort of paths have gone in the same direction in terms of gone right. Actually, I don't just want to have the one kid put on the pedestal because he's got a really big squat, or we only talk to the kid who's running a super fast 40-meter dash. Like we actually just want everyone to have the opportunity to be successful. And then the culture side of things that plays into that weekly challenge is huge. I bet it's a huge talking point. It's a huge engagement point for like everyone at your gym as well.
Oh yeah, they talk more shit than anybody I've ever seen over. I know we laugh about it because like these points literally mean nothing other
Yeah,
than like nobody knows, like you can't redeem them for anything. Nobody knows what to help, but they compete
yeah,
so hard for these
yeah,
like arbitrary points. It's so funny, like how driven we are by little video games if we can create them. But one of the things that you were saying, it's like I don't know what what's the scientific, maybe you know what it is. It's like a scientific rule to where the best theories are when two individual sources that are not communicating came to the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
conclusion without like at the same time without referencing each other. And you said the same thing. It's like we haven't talked before this hour-long conversation, and we've seen each other's socials, and even our socials. It's like we show the cool things we do, but it's not really like
yeah,
every
yeah,
nitpicking
yeah, yeah.
detail. It's not like we could have copied each other in that sense and came to the same conclusion. So that's pretty cool. Um, Last thing on the podcast, I want to talk about if I come to you, I come to train. I want to come work out with you. What's a day gonna look like for me? Like I come in and I'm in a group training setting with you. Maybe you're training like American football guys. Like, what's it actually look like if you were gonna lay out and run me through a workout? Because I think a lot of coaches they hear you and I talk, and I got this question actually in an Instagram comment yesterday. It's like I love all the creativity you have, but I really struggle in like putting it together. It's like I get lost in everything that you have. Like, what would that look like if I came to you? What are the things we're going to work on from the moment I walk in to when I leave? Like, what's that session look like?
Yeah, cool. So I think, and I talked about like the amount of structured and unstructured from like 7 to 14-year-olds, how it might be like 75% to 25% and stuff like that. But I think another thing people struggle with is sometimes they think like the way we offer games and challenges and all this movement variability is devoid of periodization, but it's actually very easy to periodize. So I'll just give an example, maybe a quick example of, let's say I've got an under 11 coming in. The way I would periodize that is my warm-up structure might be the warm-up structure I use for kids under 11, and again, there's always flexibility to this, was rep. It's just raise, engage, and potentiate. So get them moving with whatever it is, a challenge, a game, engage them psychologically. So it's not right, do a lap of the sports hall like that. It's just diabolical. But it's engage, right, we're going to play handball, we're going to play football, I've got this movement challenge, can any of you do it? Like sometimes I used to come in and like get them straight off the bat and be like, I wouldn't be like, right, you've got to do this and this. I'm like, oh guys, I've learned this new movement challenge, can any of you do it? I'll show you once, I'm not going to give you any instruction, you get 5 minutes to try crack it. That's engagement. So raise, engage, and then potentiate. Like that's very traditional to very, lots of traditional strength conditioning, potentiation, whatever you want to call it. Just switching on the central nervous system, slowly building it up so they're ready for, higher intensity stuff in a session. So that might be how I warm up with an under 11. And then the way I would periodize what people struggle to periodize, like what looks like the unstructured, the movement variability side of things, is I look at two qualities that I want to develop over 6 weeks. So it might be, I have sort of five, hopefully I can remember this, five central themes. And it's like lower body stability, and that can manifest in lots of different ways. Power development, core, and then brachiating, and then compression as well. So brachiating is like hanging, compression is anything pushing through the shoulder, and then brachiating is pulling through the shoulder, core, power, and lower body stability. Those are my five themes. And that's then, so the first half of a training session with like a under 11, I'd pick two of those that I really want to focus on over the next 6 weeks. Don't I still deviate and have the others features, and like the others might come in the warm up, the others might come at the end, but those are my themes that are going to have more time dedicated to them. So I might say, right, in this training block, we're going to have a bit more single leg stability and a bit more brachiating, so hanging from stuff. So that typical 20 minutes then of a training session, you might come in and see kids have the balance beams out, or like yoga blocks and they're trying to do different challenges, or half Bosu balls and they're trying to balance on those things, or like just trying to, if you've ever seen like slide boards, you might have the slide boards out, they might still be doing like bilateral stuff, but it's still going to contribute to stability in the lower limb. So there might be lots of those things. So we know they're getting 20 minutes of exposure. It's not sets and reps. It's just exposure to stuff that's going to improve lower body stability. And then that might be coupled with lots of gripping challenges. So they might have a challenge on the climbing wall. They've got to move and knock a tennis ball off with their foot, or they've got to hang on the bar for a certain amount of seconds, or try set a high score, or they're trying to swing in from rings or ropes. So we know that it's still, distraction force through the shoulder, grip as well is central. So for 6 weeks, we know they're getting a really good exposure. But that way we can get lots of different variability in the way we approach it. And then the end of the session might be, okay, they're doing a hip thrust for 6 weeks. to just get that traditional sort of exposure. And also, it's really important to still learn how to resistance train. That's a skill in itself. So that's what like an under 11 session might look like. For if you came in and I was taking an 11 to 14 session, you might see the same structure, but with the warm up, there might be a few more extra mobility exercises because like I didn't really mention mobility for like under 11s because typically they're more mobile. And also, if you've ever got a kid just to go stand there and go, right, I want you to do a Spider-Man or I want you to do an inchworm, they're like, like, do you know what I mean? They just don't care. So if I do mobility, so let's say when I get to the 11 to 14 year olds, the warm up might be raise and engage. But one of the things that's getting them to engage is we've got a like hurdle or salt course that they've got to navigate through, get under and over and under over. So they're getting really deep hip ranges or like deep flexion and extension. And so we're still getting that engagement bit, but a bit more mobility. They then might go into, again, like I said, those 5 key themes. It might be like core and compression or like lower body strength, but just slightly less time delegated to that like movement variability approach. And then they go into more like structured. So then they're going into 4 exercises of doing sets and reps. Like, okay, this is your movements. This is what you're gonna do. They have their program, fill it out. So that's kind of like what a session might look like in terms of how I set it up for younger kids, medium range, and then the older kids, I might just actually have the movement variability, like the movement problem solving tasks, like the challenges you might see on my social media as an extended warm up. So we just come in, we're going to try lots of different things to warm up. We're not going to do traditional stuff. We're going to just like, I'm going to show you something you've never done before. And we're going to try come up with a solution of that problem, essentially. And that might be the extended warm up. And then depending where they're at, we might go straight into a full S&C session, or if you have the luxury that you're training them 2-3 times a week, we might do a lot more movement variability stuff because how much is enough of the strength training, the traditional strength training, is that question then you have to ask yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I love the 5 pillars that you mentioned. And even in, so I work with a lot of college strength conditioning, and college athletes in the college
Mhm.
strength conditioning world. And that's the big thing with the movement variability is I will do that even with the traditional strength conditioning pillars. So like let's say it's a lower body day. I know on Tuesday we got a sprint stimulus I want done, and I want a strength unilateral stimulus done. From there, once I have those pillars, I know I got to hit these pillars. The tool that I use to hit the pillar to me is very open. And that's where it's like the stress of being able to balance everything and am I hitting every it's like you're hitting your pillars and that's all that matters. Like your pillar is unilateral strength stimulus, hinge strength, whatever, like however you want to you get the value and pick what you want as your pillars. But I really believe once you have that set, and I think a lot of coaches don't necessarily or aren't confident in that pillar system. Once you don't have those pillars set, then the all the tools are super complicated and you do stress out over that. But it's like simplify the stimulus, simplify the pillars of what you want to get done in that certain day, whether it's strength conditioning, whether it's long-term youth at like development, and then you can plug and play from there. And that's when it really gets fun to where like we have 6 weeks of unilateral strength development and we can use a different tool every single week. And then on that 6 week, and that's my goal with a lot of it. I mean, it's the old conjugate style, but you come back to that 6th week that or the first week in the 7th week and you're PRing on that lift that you haven't touched in 6 weeks. And to me, that's very rewarding. And it has helped a ton on the wear and tear with the athletes, both psychological, but like I'll say physiological. Like the athlete is not as nearly as beat up and they're making strength gains and they feel better. I'm like, that's a win-win to me.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we push the boat too far in terms of like the traditional like periodization strategies are really around like nailing yourself at the week 4, 5, and 6 on this same lift that you've really pushed up, and it's like how much return are we actually getting for that energy expenditure compared to having a bit more variability, having like having them move through way more ranges of motion, not being so robotic and it's quite hard because I think again when you start talking like this, people think you're going to start doing like functional patterns as you're training or something, and like do you know what I mean? And it's hard to go like, do you know what? You could take 1 or 2 of those things and they're really good, but it's like just realizing it's not so black and white and there's lots of gray areas and just finding what works really.
Yeah, I talk about sipping the Kool-Aid of that stuff, but you can't drink the whole cup, man. If you drink the whole cup, you're
Yeah.
gonna be stuck in some program that gets you way, way out there. So, but I really appreciate the time, man. This was a phenomenal talk. It lived up to the hype. I was looking forward to this one for a while. So I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
No worries. I really appreciate jumping on. It's been really cool just to hear where you're at. Because like again, I've said it a few times. Like I see your stuff on social media. I was like, if I was still working with adults, that's where I'd be. So it's quite interesting to hear how you've actually got to there. Because like I said, we hadn't spoke before, but it seems like our outcomes are really aligned. So yeah, I appreciate having the time to chat to you about those things.
Yeah, it's awesome to see how like connected it is with two different age groups, which is awesome, and two different sides of the world too, which is sweet.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell people where to follow you, get your products, everything like that, if they want to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my you'll see on like Instagram is young athlete training, and then you can pretty much find everything from that really. Like, the website, if if there's any parents out there wanting to do the online training, we have online training programs that can be done from home, and you can find that all on young athlete training. But just, I'm an open book, just drop us a message, a DM or anything like that. If you ever have any questions, don't feel like there's a brick wall stopping you.
Hell yeah, awesome. Well, appreciate you guys listening. Keep chopping wood.